G'day Reefers, I'm Cam the Fish Guy. Welcome to Gallery Aquatica TV. Today we're going to be showing you a tank which is new to Gallery Aquatica TV. It's a really successful room divider reef tank. We're going to be showing you all of the features of this tank that make it such a successful room divider reef tank, and we're going to show you what you need to consider when you're doing your own room divider reef. Firstly, we'll just have a look at the dimensions and the specifications of this system, and then we'll talk about each of the criteria that we look at to determine how we're going to set up a successful room divider reef tank. First of all, this tank is 1.6 meters long. That's a little bit over 5 feet long. It is 800 mil high, that's 28 inches, and it's also 800 mil wide. This tank is lit by 3 Gen 5 Radion Pros. And we've got 2 MP40s for our water flow. We have a Tico 2000 for keeping the temperature down in this system. We've got an Octo skimmer, and we've also got Octo Varios return pump and manifold pump. So let's go around the back of this system and we'll talk more about the dimensions of this tank and why they're important to make a successful room divider reef. We're on the other side of this room divider reef tank now, and I just wanted to have a bit of a talk about the dimensions of your room divider reef, because it is one of the most common ways that people make mistakes with these types of systems. Now, as I mentioned, this tank is 1.6 meters long, but what is actually more important, the width and the height of this tank. 800 mil wide is a particularly wide tank, and 800 high is also a really great depth. A common mistake people make with room divider tanks is that they make them very narrow, and that makes it hard to create an aquascape that looks good from both sides. Because this tank is so wide, 800 wide, it means that our aquascape is comfortable in the way that we've set it up, but also has enough working space either side of the aquarium so that it's easy to maintain and easy to get into. The dimensions of your room divider reef are a particularly important consideration for the overall success of your aquarium. So the next thing we'll look at is the lighting for your room divider reef, and it's just up here. Of course, the lighting for any reef aquarium is a particularly important consideration because you need to ensure that you've got the proper spectrum and schedule for your corals. But in a room divider reef, one thing that we do have to consider is that often the tank is enclosed, as is this one, and so you need to ensure that you have adequate space to mount your lights. Now, this is a great example of a good way to set up your lighting system for a room divider reef, because we have heaps of space which allows us to comfortably mount our 3 Radion Gen 5s. And we've also got a nice section behind the lights where we can have our power supplies. And what's really good is that we have power above the tank, which means that we don't have to have the lighting power cords running down the side of the tank. We've got them very neatly plugged in up the top here. So that's an excellent example of how you should set up your lighting in a room divider reef tank. Our next criteria we're going to be looking at is the filtration of this system. Room divider reef tanks, as with any reef tank, take up a fair bit of space with all of the extras, the filtration, the equipment around the tank. So I would always suggest that you have lots of space that you can work with. And again, this is an excellent example of how the space of the equipment has been considered in the design of the aquarium. we're going to look at 3 different sections around the tank that we've got the equipment. So we'll start with the first one here, which is our cupboard for plumbing. And this tank has got an external overflow. Now that's another important consideration with your room divider reef. The overflow is, in this case, neatly hidden in the cupboard. We've got very good access to it. It's very easy to access the plumbing. And so an external overflow is a great way to have the plumbing for your system feed down into the sump. We've also got extra space in this cupboard. We've got some RO water. We could put supplements or all sorts of things in this section. We'll look at the middle section now because that's where the sump is. It's probably fair to say that with a sump for a reef tank, the bigger the better. And this is a good example because it is a large sump for the tank, and it does take up a fair bit of space. You can see we've got our sump to the right, we've got our RO water system, and we've got our TK2000 chiller just here. But having all of this space underneath the aquarium makes a huge difference to the ease of maintenance, as well as just the amount of equipment that you can run. And this tank has also got a UV sterilizer, it's got an Apex system, and you can see we've got lots of space for our plumbing. We've got our manifold system over here. It's well and truly automated, this system, but to have the space to do that really makes all the difference. So we'll have a look at the last section, which is the cupboard to the left. We've got the last part of the sump here, where you can see we've got our Octo protein skimmer, but importantly we have our Kamoa dosing pump, and it's nice to have heaps of space for the supplements. We run Triton on this tank, of course, and so it's nice to have the Triton in big 5-litre containers, because that way we know we're not going to run out. But we also have space above this section here for all the accessories and things that are handy to have for your maintenance and upkeep of the tank. So again, the space around the tank makes a huge difference for how easy it is to have success with a room divider reef tank. The aquascape is one of the most important considerations with room divider reef tanks, and depending on the dimensions really dictates how you can do the aquascape. And because we're fortunate enough to have such a wide tank, we're really able to create a dynamic aquascape, which is effectively 3 bommies, our main 2 bommies and a smaller bommy in the center here. And it creates what I would consider to be the perfect amount of structure so that you can see through to the other side, but there's enough coral and places for coral that you can really sort of fill the tank out nicely. The aquascape is particularly important when you've got tall tanks as well. So this tank is 800 high, and so I like to have our aquascape come past the halfway mark. Typically, the corals will go the rest of the way, and this being a relatively young tank, we still don't have corals that are reaching for the top of the water, for the water surface, but it's certainly getting there. The corals are growing well, and at some stage, we will have the top half of the tank somewhat filled with corals. So let's talk about the coral selection for a room divider reef tank. The corals that I would choose for a room divider reef tank are in many ways the typical corals that I would choose for a reef. We have got things that are best on the substrate, our heliofungias, and corals that prefer lower amounts of light. We've got the platygyra and fabias and things like that. And of course, we're going to have our corals that like a lot of light higher in the tank. But I really do like the idea of having corals that are reaching for the surface. So in the near future, we'll probably put some acropora, stag acroporas on these peaks over here. We do have the bird's nest on this one here. I wanted to give that a little bit of a head start. That's a bird of paradise we've got there. But certainly corals like blue stag and Dallas, so that we've got corals really reaching for the surface. I like the idea of being able to see through the corals to the room on the other side, but also just to get that height in the tank. I like to use a lot of Montipora, and I use Montipora in pretty much all tanks, especially the red and green scrolling. The green scroller in this case has really been given the priority space. It's right in the center of the tank and it's going really well. It'll be great to see that get bigger. It's got lots of space around it, and that will probably become the feature coral of this tank. But we do have the red Monty scroller in 2 spots. I try and be careful with red scrolling Monty. It grows so quickly that in some cases it can kind of take over the tank. Today we're actually going to be putting a clam into this aquarium, and having lots of open sand. We've got lots of locations for the clam, but certainly a clam and probably minimal corals on this tank, because the bulk of the corals are going to be up on the rockwork. So let's talk about the fish selection, because this is something that I would say is one of the most important considerations for your room divider reef. My plan with this tank from the very start was to have lots of fish swimming in the water column. And so the aquascape, the dimensions, everything has really been designed for that. And so the fish that we choose to swim around in the open water is critically important. Now, this tank does have your typical clownfish. There's a blue tang. We've got there's a lawnmower blenny in there, an orchid dottyback. There's quite a few fish that do associate more with the rockwork, but we have made a real point of having a large number of fish that are swimming out and about in the tank. And so we've got the classic chromis, we've got a school of those. We've got some Cooper's anthias. They provide some color with the fish up in the water column. But my favorite fish that we've added to this tank are actually these blue dart gobies. And we've got 4 of them in here. Their shape is so unique, so long and slender, and their colors are so beautifully iridescent. They really sort of shimmer in the light, and they are definitely one of the best fish in this tank. But we've also got firetail gobies. We've got some gold line cardinals. So there's quite a few different species of fish that all come together beautifully to create this nice, happy dynamic. And we've always got fish swimming around. And that's what, in my opinion, really makes this tank a beautiful room divider reef tank. The last thing that I look at for creating a successful room divider reef tank are the maintenance considerations. Now, what I mean by that is it's very important to be able to work on your reef tank for it to be successful. I've already mentioned that this tank has got excellent access and heaps of space, which allows us to really get into the tank, to move things around, to glue corals in place, and all the things that we need to do in our reef tank. Given that this tank is 800 wide, we can get away with access from one side only. If the tank was any wider, then we would really need access from the other side as well. But in this case, this is the perfect amount of access. I would also consider it's important to be able to have typical maintenance considerations, like somewhere to drain water to, access. In this case, we use natural seawater for our water changes, so it's good to be able to get our vehicle carrying the seawater close enough to the tank. It's important, again, to be able to maintain your filtration system, and that's really a space consideration. But if you can't maintain your room divider reef tank, then you're never going to have the great success like this tank is enjoying. Okay. Today we're putting in a beautiful little blue Maxima clam, and I'm going to try him out in the middle here just to see how he goes. I may in future move him around the other side, But I like the idea of having certain things that you can only see from one side of the tank. So it really encourages people to not only look from the other side, but come around here and have a look and find something different. This clam I think will look perfect given we've got so much nice white sand and open space, and he is a particularly nice clam. So that's our video on room divider reef. Hopefully you've learned a little something about how to best set up a room divider reef tank. They are a tank, a type of tank that it's relatively easy to make mistakes in the design phase, which can cause problems and make it difficult to have success with these tanks. So thank you so much for watching this episode of Gallery Aquatica TV. I'm Cam the Fish Guy. Happy reefing.